The faint hum of the coffee machine filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso. Maddie Carter blinked groggily, struggling to shake off the thick fog of sleep that clung to her mind. The Seattle skyline peeked through the rain-streaked window, its familiar grayness wrapping around the city like a comforting embrace. She stretched, running a hand through her tousled blonde hair, and padded into the kitchen. Daniel was already there, dressed in his usual gray sweater and navy blue slacks, pouring steaming liquid into a ceramic mug. "Morning, babe," he greeted, his voice smooth, easy. Maddie smiled. Yawning as she reached for the cup, he slid toward her across the counter. The heat seeped into her palms as she lifted it to her lips, but just before taking a sip, something made her pause. A smell, slightly bitter, with an underlying chemical tinge, like metal and medicine fused together. She lowered the mug slightly, frowning. "Did you change the coffee brand?" she asked, forcing a small laugh to keep the question light. Daniel's hands, mid-movement, froze for half a second before he recovered. "Nope, same as always," he said too quickly, before turning back to the sink, rinsing out the French press. Maddie hesitated, staring at the dark liquid in her mug. She swirled it slightly, watching the faint bubbles break the surface. It looked normal, smelled almost normal. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her. She had been feeling a little off lately. Brushing off the unease, she took a cautious sip. The bitterness hit her tongue immediately, sharper than usual, but she swallowed it down anyway. As the warmth spread through her, a slow, creeping sensation settled in her limbs, like her body was sinking into quicksand. Her vision blurred at the edges. She shook her head slightly, trying to clear the haze. "I need to wake up," she muttered to herself, setting the mug down. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes unreadable. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired," she said, forcing a smile. He nodded, sipping his own coffee, and Maddie couldn't help but notice that he never took his eyes off her. The rest of the morning passed in a strange, sluggish haze. Maddie struggled to focus as she sat at her desk, reviewing client designs. Words and images swam in front of her, her fingers heavy against the keyboard. By lunchtime, she had to lie down. Something wasn't right. Her stomach twisted, a deep nausea curling inside her like an unwelcome guest. She squeezed her eyes shut, breathing slowly. This isn't the first time. The thought hit her suddenly, flashing through her mind like a bolt of lightning. Maddie's eyes snapped open. It wasn't the first time. She sat up slowly, heart thudding. The coffee. It had smelled strange before. Maybe not every day, but at least 3 times this past month. She'd always shrugged it off, convinced herself it was the roast, or maybe the mug not being washed thoroughly. But this morning had felt different. She glanced toward the kitchen, where the empty mug still sat on the counter. A strange, heavy feeling settled in her chest. That night, as she lay in bed next to Daniel, her mind refused to rest. His breathing was slow, steady, completely at ease. But Maddie, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, an unsettling question gnawing at the edges of her sanity. What if I'm not imagining things? And what if Daniel knows exactly what he's doing? Maddie woke up before her alarm, her mind already racing. The unease from yesterday hadn't faded. In fact, it had only grown worse overnight. She could feel it now, like a shadow pressing against her chest. Daniel was still asleep beside her, his breathing even and untroubled. For a few moments, she simply watched him, her mind looping over the same haunting question. Why is he drugging me? Her fingers curled into the sheets. She needed answers. But first, she needed to be smart. Slipping out of bed as quietly as possible, she tiptoed toward the bathroom, shutting the door softly behind her. She turned on the faucet, letting the water run to cover any noise, then reached under the sink and grabbed a small glass jar. Carefully, she padded back to the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she picked up her coffee mug from the counter, staring at the dark liquid inside. The thought of drinking it again sent a sickening shudder through her. Instead, she poured the remainder into the jar, sealed the lid tight, and stuffed it into a paper bag. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, maybe take it to a lab or a pharmacy. But she needed proof. Her next step? Catching him in the act, setting up the trap. That morning, Maddie pretended to drink her coffee. She lifted the mug, let it touch her lips, and subtly tilted it just enough to make it look like she was sipping. Daniel watched her. She felt his gaze like a weight pressing on her, but she didn't flinch. She smiled at him, even made a show of licking her lips. "Tastes good today," she said casually. Daniel's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. She forced herself to keep looking at him, even though her stomach was in knots. Then, when he turned his back, she poured the rest into the sink as quietly as she could. It was a small victory, but it made her heart pound. That evening, after Daniel left for a quick store run, Maddie acted fast. She ordered a small hidden camera online, a sleek, barely noticeable device that could be disguised as a phone charger. It would arrive the next day. One more day. Just one more day, and she'd know the truth. The footage that changed everything. The following morning, Maddie woke up before Daniel. Her heart was racing as she reached for her phone and checked the hidden camera app. The footage had been recording for hours. Her fingers trembled as she rewound to 6:30 a.m., just before Daniel had gone into the kitchen. She tapped play. At first, everything seemed normal. Daniel walked into the kitchen, stretched, then started making coffee. He moved with an ease that she had seen 1,000 times before, grinding the beans, boiling the water, humming softly under his breath. But then, at exactly 6:47 a.m., something changed. Maddie froze. Daniel paused for a long moment, his back to the camera. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dark bottle. He unscrewed the cap, leaned over her mug, and poured in a few drops. Maddie's stomach plummeted. She clutched the phone so hard her fingers ached, eyes locked on the screen. Daniel stirred the coffee carefully, like nothing was wrong. Then, he picked up the bottle, tucked it back into his pocket, and carried on as if he hadn't just... Maddie felt like she was going to throw up. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. What the hell did I just watch? Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Daniel was drugging her. Every part of her body screamed at her to do something, to run, to fight, to scream at him the moment he walked out of the bedroom. But instead, she sat perfectly still, because another, far more chilling thought slammed into her. Why? Why would her husband, the man she had spent 6 years with, built a life with, be drugging her? What did he need her unconscious for? What the hell was he doing to her? A sudden realization. Maddie's pulse roared in her ears as she clutched her stomach. A wave of nausea hit her, but this time it wasn't from the drugs. It was from pure, unfiltered terror. Daniel's footsteps sounded in the hallway. Maddie scrambled to close the app, tucking her phone into her lap just as the bedroom door creaked open. Daniel poked his head in. "You okay, babe?" His voice was soft, concerned. Maddie forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." His eyes searched hers, as if looking for something. For a moment, she thought he could see through her, that he knew she had seen. Then, just like that, he smiled again. "All right. Coffee's ready whenever you want it." Her stomach twisted. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Daniel lingered for a second longer, then disappeared back into the kitchen. The moment he was gone, Maddie let out a slow, shaking breath. She needed more than just footage. She needed answers, and she needed to find them before it was too late. Maddie sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone screen, long after the footage had ended. Her fingers gripped the sheets so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her husband was drugging her, and she had no idea why. Her heart pounded so hard she thought Daniel might hear it from the other room. For 6 years, she had trusted this man, loved him. They had built a life together, holidays, anniversaries, late-night movies on the couch. He was the man who kissed her forehead when she had a migraine, who always made sure she had a blanket when she fell asleep on the sofa. And yet there it was. Proof. He had been slipping something into her coffee. Had it been happening for weeks? Months? How much of her life had been erased? Maddie inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. If she confronted him now, she'd have no leverage. She needed more than just video evidence. She needed to find out what he was hiding. She needed to know what he was doing to her when she wasn't awake to remember. A desperate search for answers. Maddie waited until Daniel left for work before making her move. She stood by the window, watching as he backed his car out of the driveway, the tires splashing through rain puddles. The moment he was out of sight, she ran to his office. The door was locked. That in itself wasn't unusual. Daniel had always been protective of his workspace. But today, that lock felt like a warning. Her fingers trembled as she reached above the door frame, searching for the spare key he had once told her about. She found it. Her heart pounded as she slid it into the lock, twisting it until she heard the quiet click. The door creaked open. She hesitated. A part of her didn't want to go inside. A part of her was terrified of what she might find, but she had already gone too far to stop now. The first clues. Daniel's office was meticulously organized. Too organized. Every document, every file was neatly stacked. No clutter, no mess. It looked like a place where nothing happened, except Maddie knew better. She sat down at his desk, opening the top drawer. Pens, a stapler, a leather notebook, nothing suspicious. Her hands moved quickly, checking the side drawers. Bills, a few tax forms. Then, the bottom drawer. Locked. Maddie's pulse spiked. Why would Daniel lock one drawer and not the others? She rummaged through his desk, searching for a key. Nothing. Then her eyes landed on a USB flash drive sitting by his keyboard. Her breath caught. She grabbed it and plugged it into his desktop computer. Her hands were sweating as she clicked open the drive folder. There were dozens of files, and one of them caught her attention immediately. Project Vera. Project Vera. Maddie's fingers trembled as she opened the file. The screen flickered for a moment before filling with rows of messages and financial transactions. A deep, cold dread settled in her stomach. The first message was from an unknown number. Is she still drinking it? Maddie's breath hitched. The reply came from Daniel. Yes, she doesn't suspect a thing. Her stomach twisted violently. There were more messages. Increase the dosage. We need her unaware by the end of the week. Has she started forgetting yet? We can't afford any mistakes. Maddie's vision blurred. She scrolled further. The next transaction nearly made her drop the mouse. A $150,000 deposit had been made into a hidden bank account under Daniel's name. The sender? ST Holdings, LLC. Maddie had never heard of it before. She took a shaky breath, trying to piece it together. Daniel had been drugging her. He had been reporting on her condition to someone. And now, he had been paid to do something to her. The second discovery. Maddie hurriedly copied everything onto a flash drive. Her hands moved on autopilot, her thoughts racing. Who the hell was ST Holdings, LLC, and what had Daniel agreed to do to her? She clicked on another document, skimming the contents. A legal contract, a non-disclosure agreement. The names on it, Daniel Carter, recipient, and Eric Langley, executive, ST Holdings, LLC. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. Eric Langley. She knew that name. It had been years since she had last seen him. He was her ex-boyfriend, the one who had vanished without a trace after their breakup, the one she had barely thought about since. And yet here he was, paying her husband to drug her. The secret bank account. Maddie dug deeper. She found Daniel's hidden bank account login credentials saved in an encrypted folder. Her hands shook as she entered them. The balance, $163,750, and another transaction scheduled for Friday. Her stomach twisted. Friday. That's what Daniel had said in the video. I'll be done by Friday. After that, she won't be a problem anymore. Maddie's hands were ice cold. Whatever was supposed to happen on Friday, She wouldn't survive it. Racing against time. Her breath was coming too fast. She had to get out of here. She yanked out the flash drive and shoved it into her pocket. As she turned toward the door, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps in the hallway. Daniel was home. Maddie's heart slammed against her ribs. She glanced at the computer, still open. The drawer, still unlocked. She had seconds to fix this. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, closing windows, ejecting the USB, locking the drawer. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A shadow loomed beneath the crack. She barely managed to shove the chair back into place when the doorknob twisted. The door swung open. Daniel stood there watching her. "Hey," he said, smiling. "What are you doing in here?" Maddie swallowed hard. "Think, Maddie. Think." She forced a laugh, gesturing toward his desk. "I was looking for the checkbook. The electric bill is due." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the desk, then back to her. There was a long pause. Then he smiled again. "You should have just asked me, babe." She held her breath. For a moment, she thought he might see through her. But then, he leaned against the doorframe, stretching lazily. "Dinner's almost ready. Come eat." Maddie nodded, her pulse roaring in her ears. She walked past him, keeping her steps light, her expression neutral. But inside, she was screaming. Because she knew now, without a doubt. If she didn't get out before Friday, she wouldn't be leaving at all. Maddie's pulse hammered as she stepped out of Daniel's office, her every muscle tense. She felt his presence just behind her, his gaze lingering on her back. And could he hear how hard her heart was beating? She forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her posture relaxed, but her mind was screaming. She had to get out, but she had to be smart about it. If Daniel was willing to drug her, to wipe her memory, to accept money from her ex-boyfriend to make her disappear, then she had no doubt he would notice if she suddenly tried to leave. She couldn't afford to tip him off, not yet. So she turned back toward him with a small smile. "Dinner smells amazing," she said, pretending as if her world hadn't just shattered into pieces. Daniel's lips curled into that easy, practiced smile. "I made your favorite." Playing along, Maddie sat at the dinner table, the glow of candlelight flickering across Daniel's face as he poured them both a glass of wine. He had cooked grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, plating it with careful precision, as if this was just another normal night. She forced herself to eat slowly, naturally, even though every bite felt like poison in her mouth. "Busy day at work?" Daniel asked, watching her closely. Maddie nodded, taking a sip of wine she had no intention of finishing. "Yeah, the clients are being extra picky about revisions lately." A lie. She had barely touched her laptop all day. She'd spent every moment uncovering his secrets. Daniel chuckled. "Well, good thing you have me to make sure you don't stress too much." Her stomach twisted. "He means drugging me." She nodded, pretending to appreciate the sentiment before setting down her fork. "I think I'm going to take a bath after this," she said casually. "I've been feeling kind of tired today." Daniel's head tilted slightly. "Tired?" Her palms felt clammy, but she shrugged. "Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I've been overworking myself." He didn't speak right away. Then slowly, he smiled. "Yeah, maybe." Maddie's fingers tightened around her napkin. She knew what he was thinking. She had been tired for weeks because of him. Preparing the final move that night, Maddie lay awake in bed, her back turned to Daniel. She could feel the warmth of his body beside her, his steady breaths filling the silence. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Instead, she waited. Waited until his breathing slowed. Waited until she was sure he was asleep. Then, as quietly as possible, she slipped out of bed and padded toward the kitchen. She needed to set up one last piece of evidence. She reached for the second hidden camera she had ordered yesterday, pulling it from its packaging. This one wasn't for the kitchen. This one was going in Daniel's office. Carefully, she positioned it behind a decorative clock on his shelf, angling it toward his desk. The camera would capture everything: his phone calls, his emails, anything he did when he thought she wasn't watching. And then she waited. The final footage. The next night, once Daniel had gone to bed, Maddie retrieved the camera footage from his office. Her heart pounded violently as she watched the screen. At first, nothing. Just Daniel working at his desk, typing away at his laptop, his face unreadable. But then, at 11:42 p.m., he pulled out his phone. Maddie leaned in closer, pressing the volume button to hear better. The call rang. Then a voice on the other end. A man. Is she still taking it? Maddie's blood turned to ice. Daniel rubbed his forehead, sighing. Yeah, she has no clue. A pause. Then the voice spoke again. Good. We need her out of the picture by Friday. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. She clasped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from making a sound. Friday. 2 days from now. Daniel nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. I know. And she doesn't suspect anything? No, Daniel said, his voice firm. She's completely unaware. The voice on the phone laughed darkly. Good. Then by this weekend, we can finally settle this. Daniel ended the call. Maddie's entire body was shaking. They were planning something for Friday, and if she didn't escape before then, she wouldn't be alive to see Saturday. The escape plan, Maddie knew what she had to do. She needed to leave, tonight. She packed only the essentials, a small bag with some clothes, her laptop, the flash drive containing all the evidence, and the small jar of drugged coffee as proof. But before she could walk out the door, she needed to do one more thing. She grabbed her phone and texted her lawyer friend, Olivia. Maddie, I need your help. Now, no questions. Call me when you wake up. She set her phone to silent and stuffed it into her pocket. Then she took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. Daniel's reaction. Maddie had expected to make it out of the house quietly. She hadn't expected Daniel to be waiting for her in the living room. He sat on the couch, completely calm, his hands folded in his lap. Maddie froze. His eyes flicked to the bag in her hand. You're leaving. His voice was eerily neutral. Maddie swallowed. I just needed some air. Daniel's lips curled slightly. Air? He leaned back, tilting his head, studying her. Then he smiled. I saw you take the flash drive. Maddie's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the bag strap. I know you went through my office, Daniel continued, his voice smooth, and I know you saw the messages. Maddie's stomach twisted into knots. She needed to stay calm. Daniel, He stood up. Maddie took a step back. His smile remained. It's okay, Maddie. Her chest tightened. It was the way he said it. So casual, so confident. Like he wasn't worried at all. Like he already knew how this would end. Then he took a slow step toward her. You should sit down, he murmured. Let's talk about this. Number no, no, no. Maddie turned and ran. She bolted toward the door, yanking it open, but Daniel was faster. His hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her back. Maddie, he hissed. She twisted, kicking out wildly, knocking a lamp over. Daniel staggered back just enough for her to break free. Without looking back, she sprinted into the night, a desperate escape. Maddie didn't stop running until she was 3 blocks away. Her breath was ragged, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped her phone. She hit the dial button. Come on, Olivia, pick up, pick up. Hello? Maddie almost collapsed in relief. Olivia, she gasped. I need you to help me. I think my husband is trying to kill me. Silence. Then, I'm on my way, Olivia said. And finally, Maddie let herself cry. Maddie sat in the back of Olivia's car, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Rain streaked against the windshield as Olivia sped through the nearly empty streets, her jaw tight, eyes flicking toward Maddie every few seconds. Jesus, Maddie, she muttered. They start from the beginning. Maddie swallowed hard, gripping the flash drive in her lap like a lifeline. Daniel's been drugging me. I have proof. Videos, messages, financial records. He was paid to do it. Olivia's brows knitted together. Paid? By who? Maddie licked her dry lips. Eric Langley. The name hung in the air like a curse. Olivia's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Eric? As in your ex? That Eric? Maddie nodded, her throat tightening. I don't know why, but he's behind it. And Daniel knew. He knew I'd figure it out. He tried to stop me. Her voice shook. The memory of his grip on her wrist, the dark glint in his eyes sent a fresh wave of terror through her. She had barely gotten away, and she knew, if she had hesitated even a second longer, she wouldn't have made it out. Olivia pressed the gas pedal harder. We're going to the police right now. Daniel's arrest. It all happened fast. The moment Maddie walked into the Seattle Police Department, the officers took one look at her pale face and trembling hands before ushering her into a private room. She placed the flash drive onto the table, and then she told them everything. She showed them the footage of Daniel drugging her coffee. She played the recording of his phone call where he confirmed she wouldn't be a problem after Friday. She handed over the financial records showing the $150,000 deposit from ST Holdings. The officer in charge, Detective Samuel Grayson, listened in complete silence. When the last video ended, he leaned forward, folding his hands together. Mrs. Carter, do you understand what this means? Maddie nodded, her stomach twisting into knots. It means my husband was planning to kill me. Grayson exhaled sharply, then turned to his partner. We need a warrant for Daniel Carter's arrest, now. The moment of justice. Maddie watched from across the street as police cars swarmed her house. Red and blue lights flashed against the dark sky. She could see Daniel standing in the doorway, confused, then alarmed. Then, an officer stepped forward. Daniel Carter, you are under arrest for attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit murder, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Daniel's expression shifted instantly. 1 second, he looked shocked. The next, he was smirking. Maddie's blood ran cold. Why is he smiling? The officers cuffed him and led him toward the squad car. But just before they shoved him inside, Daniel turned his head and locked eyes with Maddie. His lips curled. Then he spoke, just loud enough for her to hear. Tell them it was you, Maddie. Tell them it was your idea. Maddie's breath caught. What? The officers pulled him into the car before she could process what he had just said. But the words clung to her like a noose. Why would he say that? Unless there was more to this than she realized. The true mastermind. Daniel's arrest was only the beginning. 2 days later, Detective Grayson called Maddie back to the station. She walked into his office, her stomach in knots. He gestured for her to sit. His face was grim. Maddie, he started, voice heavy, we've been investigating ST Holdings, and we found something you need to see. He slid a file across the desk. Maddie's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a name, Eric Langley, and beneath it, financial records linking him to multiple offshore accounts. Millions of dollars. Maddie's throat went dry. What is this? Grayson exhaled. ST Holdings isn't just some shady company. It's a front. Eric Langley has been laundering money for years, and based on what we found, you were his next target. Maddie felt her pulse spike. She flipped through the documents, her eyes scanning over the transactions, the connections, the elaborate network of deception. And then her breath hitched, because there, buried in the files, was a birth certificate with her name on it. Maddie's heart stopped. She lifted her head, eyes wide. Why is this here? She whispered. Grayson's expression darkened. Because, Maddie, he said slowly, you have an inheritance worth $5 million, and you never knew. The final revelation. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. Maddie's hands shook violently as she stared at the papers. "That's not possible. I don't have family money. My parents weren't wealthy." Grayson nodded. "You're right. They weren't." He flipped to another page, an old legal document from 1991, Maddie's birth year, and beneath it, her biological parents' names, not the ones she had grown up with, not the ones she had always known. Her entire body went cold. She barely heard Grayson's voice as he continued. "Your biological father was a wealthy investor. When he died, he left everything to his firstborn child, you. But since you were adopted as a baby, the inheritance remained unclaimed." Maddie felt like she couldn't breathe. Her entire life had been a lie, and Eric Langley, her ex-boyfriend, the man she had trusted once, had known. He had found out about the inheritance, and he had paid Daniel to eliminate her, because once she was gone, he could claim the money himself. The final showdown. 2 weeks later, the police tracked Eric Langley down. Maddie watched from the courtroom as the charges were read aloud. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement. Eric sat across the courtroom, his expression calm, unbothered. Even as the judge declared, "Bail is denied pending trial." He finally turned toward her, his lips curling slightly. Maddie's fists clenched. This man had nearly stolen her life. And he wasn't even sorry. But it didn't matter. Because she had won. She had survived. 1 year later. Maddie stood outside a beautiful brownstone in New York City, a fresh start in her hands. She had spent the last year rebuilding, healing, learning how to live again. And today, she was taking control of the inheritance that had almost cost her life. As she walked inside, Olivia clapped a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Maddie," she murmured. Maddie smiled softly. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. And as she looked at the future ahead of her, she whispered to herself, "No one will ever take anything from me again."